all I can say, all I can say is that I feel for her. I mean, all right. I feel a certain amount of sympathy. I mean, why would you go and be made to sit on the floor and hurt for 10 days? This is really, there are easier ways to do things, but there we are.
Mm-hmm. Actually, yes, the Goenka retreats have gotten a reputation that gives the label of boot camp.
Yeah. But then you think, this is Vipassana. This is supposed to give people insights. And I'm thinking, here am I doing what I'm doing, following to my best of my ability, the Anapanasati Sutta. Where are all the insights? I'm not getting any, or at least I'm not getting anything much in the way of what I would see as an insight.
All right, here's a question for you. What's an insight?
I don't know. That's the point. I read this about people get insights.
Right, this woman, she didn't give you much of anything. Did she even talk about any insights, or what do you mean by an insight?
No, because we were sitting there. We were actually sailing on a boat, on a sailing boat, on my son's boat, with this lady and my wife and my son, who the latter two are sort of very atheist, materialist, completely secular, and think that I'm a complete lunatic doing what I'm doing,
But she's doing the same thing and failing at it, and you're doing what you're doing and succeeding. So you must be the loony.
Yeah, well, that's nice, but am I succeeding in it? Because where's all the insights?
All right. The answer to that, the easy, quick, and profound answer is that we get insight into dukkha, into the nature of dukkha, into the fact that it's our ignorance about our greed and our will that causes the dukkha, and that we can see then what is an unwholesome thought and what is a wholesome thought. You can tell the difference. That's the insight. And as we practice on and getting, let us say, more calm, more joy, more happiness, then we begin to see more and more the difference between a thought that we let pass through, and now we're going to block it because it is an unwholesome thought. We recognize, or we didn't have the skills to see what's wholesome and unwholesome in the beginning, but as we develop our practice, we begin to see more and more what's dukkha and what's not dukkha. Here's my question then. What other insight is worthwhile in the nature of the teaching of the Buddha? Would psychological archaeology and insights into why I got spanked when I was 4 years old, or that when I got spanked I became an asshole? I mean, what kind of insights are people looking for? And that I imagine, like you said, that she didn't offer anything, because I don't even think she knows what she was looking for, but that's a common word. In fact, they even title their retreats as an insight retreat or a Vipassana retreat without even knowing what they're talking about. They're just following the rules and the forms that Goenka laid down.
The impression, well, I didn't get anything from her about insights. Certainly, the word I don't think ever came up. She, quite honestly, she didn't seem to have much clue about what it had all been about.
Okay.
if it was
Okay,
about
could
anything.
you say then that the insights were twofold? Her insight was is that she got no insights. And number two, the insight she got is that she didn't like it.
Well, I don't know if she got any insights, because this was sort of mentioned in passing and not discussed in any detail, and we went back to carry on sailing the boat.
Okay. But you did gather that she didn't like the retreat very much.
I certainly got it that she
Since the only thing that you did say or talk about was pain.
I think the most sorry. Yeah, she was. She did. That was the most sort of obvious thing about what she said. I mean, she didn't seem. I mean, I said to her, I said, "Oh, I know, I practice anapanasati," and she didn't seem to know what anapanasati was. I mean, they obviously don't teach you. Well, he doesn't. I mean, as you explained, he does the deep breathing and he does the body scanning and so on, but that seems to
It
be it.
is actually possible that she was in too much pain to listen to anything they said.
Maybe, maybe.
Because they do use the word sati. They talk about it a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But he does use the word anapana, and it's kind of funny that you would use the word anapanasati and didn't ring a bell with her.
No, it didn't. It didn't seem to ring a bell at all. Anyway, I mean, as I say, it didn't. The discussion didn't go on for very long at all, and
Okay.
I didn't want to get into it particularly with others. You know, everybody else there that thinks it's all
But
nonsense.
your basic question is then, what is vipassana? What is insight?
Well, yes.
And I've just given you the answer to that.
Mm-hmm.
When it's done correctly, it's insight into the nature of dukkha, insight into whether this thought is dukkha or not, insight into this behavior is dukkha or not, insight
Mm-hmm.
into this feeling is dukkha or not, insight into whether these words I'm saying is dukkha or not. That's the basic insights.
Right. Right. Okay. Okay.
So,
Well.
and what other insights would there be? I mean, I gave you the idea of psychological archaeology. How about insights into why my husband and I fight with each other? Would that
Well.
be an insight? And how about the insight of, oh, I fight with my husband because I continuously have negative thoughts about him, and so when he comes around, I express them. Because that's closer to the actual insight.
Yeah. Well, that is. I mean, there are insights that I suppose are insights in that circumstance where your spouse or partner says something that you think is completely daft. The insight is that it's better to shut up.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that would be the insight. But that insight also fits in with the definition that I've just given you is that it's better to shut up than to cause dukkha.
Goes
To
dukkha,
recognize
yes.
that what we're saying is
Yeah,
dukkha for
yeah,
somebody else. And so they want you to shut up. And so it's better to shut up. All
yeah.
right. So that, yes, that's what we mean then is that if there's any insights that are valuable, the value is in seeing that these are unwholesome, that this is causing trouble, that this is dukkha.
Yes.
And sitting on the floor in great pain is dukkha.
Well,
And yet she didn't get any insight into that. If she had gotten insight into it, perhaps she would have adjusted her posture. Maybe sit on a chair.
well, I mean, the impression I had that she was more or less told, right, you either sit cross-legged or you kneel on your heels. And she said, I would
Yeah.
kneel on my heels. And
So did she wind up having insight into that she's prone to just do what she's told to do no matter how much it hurts?
I do not know, but can you go on a sort of retreat like that and not do what they tell you? I mean, they presumably.
Well, no, you can discuss it with them and tell them that you cannot sit that way, that you need to sit on a chair.
Maybe. I don't know.
Yes,
I mean,
absolutely.
I've never
And in
been
fact,
on.
I have seen chairs at Goenka retreats. I've seen chairs at every retreat that I've been in the meditation hall of, which is dozens. They all make chairs available.
Right.
But there's a lot of people who don't use a chair because they've been told to sit in a certain way.
Yeah. Passing on perhaps to more to something else.
All right.
Let's take. Let me try to think in order. Yes, somebody put up a sutta on the UK Sangha website on the Skype.
Skype group,
which
yes.
is Skype. Sorry,
Skype group.
Group, yes. Which was the one where somebody comes along and asks the Buddha about various sort of imponderable questions, and he says, "I don't teach that, and I don't teach that, and I don't teach that." Well, why don't you teach that? Because effectively, the Buddha says, because it gives me grief to do it. It's not going to help, and it just makes me feel confused that I don't like it, sort of thing. But then, look, where is human progress in that? If you go and sit on your bum and feel fat, dumb, and happy, and do not think about whether the world is eternal or whatever. Somebody's got to think about whether the world is eternal. Otherwise, we wouldn't have the Big Bang Theory.
Well, in fact, the Big Bang Theory now is more or less debunked and proven wrong by the James Webb Telescope. But the answer to that is, look how many Christians, preachers, college professors, philosophers, atheists, etc., spend way too much time pondering over the beginning of it all or the eternalism of it all. And in fact, while they're doing that, they're not enjoying the moment. They're not enjoying themselves because they can't come to a solution. There is no answer to that. This is why it's called an imponderable, that there is no reason to discuss that kind of stuff. Now, the kind of stuff that you're talking about, progress, is almost always scientific. An example would be the cell phone. It's amazing how much brand new technology goes into that.
I know.
The blue LEDs weren't invented until the late 1990s, 1996 in fact, and it was 10 years later that they had touchscreen phones that were in color. Before that, the touchscreens were all gray and blue or whatever like that. But it was because of that LED. Also, putting Wi-Fi, but Wi-Fi had to be invented, but it had to be invented on top of Ethernet, and Ethernet was the original web stuff with IP addresses and all of that. But it was small compared to the vastness of it today.
Yeah,
with literally cities full of big buildings full of computers just to manage the data. Okay, so all of that technology has really nothing to do with any of the imponderables. That in fact, if the people would stop pondering the imponderables and go put their mind to work, they might be able to improve on the technology that we have today. For instance, robotics. But oh no, and in fact, if you remember, there were 4 of the imponderables. One was, what was the beginning of it all? Now I'm using my own language. Number 2 is, what is the extent of the human mind? And that's an interesting one in the sense that we don't know what the human mind is capable of. what's going to happen to the Tathagata after death, which is actually related to what happens to any and everybody after death. Okay. And the, oh gosh, I can't think of the fourth one right off the hand. But the extent of the human mind also has the quality of what's the extent of the human mind, both inside jhana and outside of jhana. What was the beginning of it all? What is going to be the end of each one of us? All of those kind of questions we don't have answers to. And guess what? We don't need those answers in order to be happy right here, right now.
Yes. I'm going to do the old yes, but here. Yes, but. I mean, we're going, I suppose, back to the I teach only one thing, that is dukkha and dukkha nirodha. And, well, if he taught only one thing, and that is dukkha and dukkha nirodha, how come that he is sort of starting off the Anapanasati Sutta by saying, well, there's all these kind of guys here, and some of them are arahants, and some of them are anagamis, and all the rest of it. If he doesn't believe all that stuff.
Well, it has more to do with, let us make a division between science and art. Now, these two divisions are known in many different languages, but they're still the same. An instance is yin and yang, anima, animus, male and female, masculine and feminine, science and art. Okay? And oftentimes we ask science questions about art. All right, so when we're talking about anagamis and arahats and all of that, you're asking a science question. Well, naturally, that stuff cannot be measured, but it can be felt.
Okay.
All right, so that's basically what we're talking about is that we have to be able to handle both sides, both the science and the emotional side. And when you talked about the human race is not making or could make more technological process, that's science. To where you probably would think it humorous if I said that, but humans have not made any progress of the heart since long before Jesus.
Well, that's fairly obvious. That. Yeah, sure.
We still can't get along with each other. We still fight with each other. We still lie to each other. We still are confused about stuff. And so we have been making huge amount of progress scientifically, but we ain't going nowhere with emotion. And that's what, in fact, the practice of Anapanasati really is all about, is that dukkha and dukkha nirodha is an emotional, feeling, sensational situation, not something that can be measured with a stethoscope or a microscope or a measuring rod.
So going back to what you said a little earlier, are you saying that the arahant or whatever feels that he's an arahant? He feels that he has overcome all the fetters, etc. But you don't know whether that has no meaning apart from in his own head.
Exactly. Where else should it mean anything? It doesn't mean anything scientifically. It cannot be measured. Now, here's the thing, is that the Westerners are going to start watching every move he makes so that they can catch him. Aha!
But you see, it's not just the Westerners, it's the Easterners have taken it to this whole panoply of stuff about being reincarnated or what.
Right, but wait a minute. Don't get confused, because reincarnation and all of that is still an emotional issue, not a scientific fact. It does not belong in the realm of science because you cannot prove anything about it, much less the measurement.
So the
In other
Buddha.
words, so let us put it this way. The kid who the village thinks has remembered his past lives, they take him to some old monk or some old guru or whatever. They don't take him to IBM. Now, if IBM was really doing their job, they would put some skull caps on that kid and start things and find out exactly what year he was born and what year he died and where he was and all of his names and all of that kind of stuff. Guess what? Ain't nobody got any of that kind of information. So it's all feeling, no science. The reincarnation actually is a feeling of, I need a second chance.
So the Buddha was having, when he sat through the night and remembered all his past lives, he was doing that.
Yes, exactly, except that you have to recognize that there were 3 watches of the night. And the whole idea of the watches of the night are metaphors. That it doesn't have to do with a scientific night. That in fact, the dark night, the dark part of the night, is when we're having all kinds of magical beliefs and stuff. And then the time before dawn in that is how beings come and go. And that's getting into it. In the sense that the beings come and go mentally. I am a farmer today, and next year I'm a fisherman, and the day after that I'm an engineer. Okay? We keep changing, we keep being reborn as things in an emotional way or an emotional sense. But then the 3rd watch of the night is the important one, the profound one, because that's when the day breaks, daylight comes in, and we actually can see. And what we can see is the destruction of the taints. And what is the destruction of the taints? When that unwholesome thought comes up, let's have the insight to see that that's a taint and destroy it right then and there. But that was the real awakening of the Buddha, was in fact the process of the Eightfold Noble Path, and the way that we apply that is to Anapanasati. And yet many people have trouble taking a metaphor as a metaphor, and we take it literally. Now, what literally here means is we take it scientifically rather than listening to the emotional story.
Okay.
Okay, another example of that would be Adam and Eve. The Christians take it as a scientific political story, including talking snakes, fig leaves, the woman did it first, all of that kind of stuff, where in fact that misses the entire point of the story. The part of the entire story really is that here you have a couple of people living in paradise, and then they start eating of the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. So they're in the paradise, and they start finding evil in their paradise. They find the closer they look, the more evil they find. What kind of paradise is that? Isn't that getting thrown out of paradise is because we find evil therein? If we stop finding the evil, we can leave it as a paradise. So that's the real story, is the story of Adam and Eve, is they had to put up with the results that they were making judgments. Now that's an emotional situation. It's not a scientific situation. Scientifically, there was no Garden of Eden. There was no Adam and Eve. There was no tree of knowledge. There was no talking snake. But emotionally and metaphorically, it's an important story.
Yes. Yes. And then we have the whole panoply of the redemption and all that stuff. Oh dear. I mean,
yes,
it's remarkable.
And all of that is, and the thing of it is that it's all metaphor, it's all emotion, and yet most of the Christians, they want it to be science. They want to have a real sky daddy up there. They want to have a real virgin birth. They want to have a real dead man walking.
Mm-hmm.
But the real reality is that Jesus walked into the temple. He didn't like to find the bankers doing their banking there, and he threw them out, and they strung him up within 7 days, within a week.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's the facts. That's the reality of it. How people felt about that, since they held Jesus in high regard, they made a whole religion out of it.
Mm-hmm.
Out of the feelings of it. But the fact is that he was executed for messing with the wrong crowd.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense, certainly. Although, when you think about it, you know, I mean, I haven't read any of this for a very long time, but when you think about the aftermath, when they're all sort of saying, well, we've seen him, and they don't know whether they've seen him, and they all get together in the supper room, and he shows up, and they still don't know it's him. So
Yeah,
I
right. But
wonder.
you see, again, that's all science. The point is let's go back to the emotion is that they trusted that he was still going to be there to help them. And basically what that means then is the Jesus that's within them is what's going to help them, which is more closely to our teaching of Anapanasati, in the sense that you can change your mind into a more noble, high-class mind. You can tap into the Jesus within you if you can trust that you've got a Jesus within you. Still, it's all emotional. And yet we all talk about religion as if it were scientific facts one way or the other, and it's got nothing to do with science. It's got everything to do with how do we feel.
Yeah, well, I certainly feel I've got something I can tap into. I don't think it's anything to do with Jesus. Yes.
Well, here's a question for you scientifically. Which is more likely to happen? That a young Jewish girl told a lie, or that there was a virgin birth? Which is more likely?
It's fairly obvious, isn't it?
It's fairly obvious, isn't
yeah,
it?
yeah.
And yet, doesn't it feel delicious that he was so magical that it was a virgin birth? And that means that he's really powerful and he's going to save me from my sin because I can't do it myself.
Well, it's even better, you know, because he not only he seems to rise up into the heavens on his own sort of anti-gravity unit. He's got it built in, and then he sends for Mummy later and beams her up on a tractor beam. I mean, it's pure science fiction.
You'd think if those metaphors really worked, that you'd have a whole classification, maybe a billion or so Christians walking around saintly.
Yeah,
but the problem is that the metaphors and the stories don't work to put them in that state of being. So it doesn't matter how big and how powerful and how magical and rising up and virgin births and dying for our sins on the cross, and all of those metaphors really don't work because the people don't believe them emotionally. They're trying to believe it scientifically.
Mind you, Buddhism's got a fair few flying monks as well.
Actually, those are just stories, and that the metaphor is that if you sit peacefully and calmly, you can go into a state of feeling like that you're weightless. You can have the feeling like that you're flying through the air. Better to touch the ground to prove to yourself the reality, the science is you're not flying through the air, it's just a feeling. Okay, but when people hear those stories, they start imagining the scientists of the science of monks flying through the air. There's the other side of it, and that is that when one practices very well, one begins to walk very quietly. And there have been many times in the past few years to where I would walk in the room, walk up to say the dishwasher, and she almost drops the dishes when she says, "Where did you come from?" Right?
Yeah, well,
I just walked into the room. I'd just been standing here, and you didn't notice me, and then you got surprised. Okay, so people begin to think that monks fly through the air in order to get into the room, and they just walked in They just did it quietly.
When you do, well, I don't know. I don't know how many people claim to be eyewitnesses to that sort of thing. It always seems to be that it happens in the next monastery over the hill, you know. But
Right,
but
exactly.
but they do. I mean, you have these incidents. I mean, the sainted Gerard Magella, a southern Italian lay brother or something, who is alleged to have flown up with a cross and put it on the top of a church tower, um, in front of sort of squads of
Doesn't that
people.
give people faith, though, to say, Jesus is still with us. Let me get Jesus in my heart. Let me be filled with the Holy Spirit. Let me become a good person. That's the whole intention of it, and it never works.
Yeah, but
It
everybody thinks, how can I get to do that so that I can fly around the
right
place
instead,
too?
it's like, how can I learn to fly?
Yeah,
They don't think about getting their heart together. They're thinking about the magic of that can be seen in science.
quite easy to learn to
So
fly, actually. It just takes a lot of money to buy the aeroplane with, or at least to get in the flying club. Yeah, I've
or
done it.
or wait until they have actually they've already got it, and that is the kind of suit that you can put on and
Oh, yeah, yeah,
power things that come out of your wrist, and you can learn to fly that way.
yeah, you've
But the
got the,
whole point is that science
yeah.
and the feeling of flying is the art. That's the
Hmm.
heart. It's not the science. It's the feeling of flying, not the actual flying itself. That in fact, the actual feeling of flying, the art, is often always missing in the science of the airplanes.
Right. Now, I'm going to sort of diverge again, if I may, onto a simple question, which I think a lot of people have asked, and I started to listen to something you had talked about on one of your older podcasts, and that is reluctance to practice. Now, I know perfectly well, but well, it takes very little for me to get in now. I mean, I just take a few deep breaths and I can get it all to start up,
Good,
right?
that's well practiced. So that means
That's,
that you can do that anytime. You can be in a state, and so and whether you start asking these kind of questions, you can say, never mind, I'd rather feel good than be confused about questions.
well, yes, but I mean,
Yes, but
yes, but this is the inquiring mind, for God's sake. Am I supposed to give up having an inquiring mind?
well, which
Yeah,
would you rather have, an inquiring mind or a happy, peaceful, contented mind?
I think probably a lot of the time I'd rather have an inquiring mind.
How about you might, in fact, want to be able to have both of them upon command?
Yes,
And yet you
yes,
seem to
that
be
would be
stuck
even
in
better.
one. Yeah, but you seem to get stuck in one and not the other, rather
Well,
than
yeah,
um, when those inquiries come up, we can say, "Oh, never mind. I don't need to know that right now." And then when we do need that information, we can inquire then.
maybe. But I mean, the question is, why, when I know that I can put myself into a happy state, do I think, geez, this is all such nonsense?
Well, it is nonsense, but it's happy nonsense.
Well,
Yeah, why do we have to practice being happy? It's because we've been practicing way too much being unhappy. And so we have to practice being happy.
well, yeah. Hum.
And having
Mm.
an inquiring mind and inquiring and worrying and working and trying to get the answer, that's not very happy. That's unhappy.
Well, yeah, it's
But having an inquiring mind and doing proper research and getting the answer, that's happy.
yes,
Okay? And
but
the
it,
difference in is wanting something and then getting it versus wanting something and don't have it. And the inquiring mind often wants something and it can't have. So why don't we do also the inquiring part of inquiring about what we can get and then get it and be happy?
Well, it probably all comes down to early training, which is encapsulated in the little rhyme as follows. See the little moron, he doesn't give a damn. I wish I were a moron. My God, perhaps I am. You know, if you're going to sit there being fat, dumb, and happy, you're putting itself into a moronic state.
Yes, except that the Buddha doesn't talk about fat, dumb, and happy. He talks about wise and happy, fat optional.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, wise and happy. You see, the little moron is fat, dumb, and happy only because the people who see him sitting there happy, they don't like it. So they've got to put the word dumb on him. In fact, he's probably a lot smarter than they are because they're not happy and the moron knows how. But then the part of perhaps I am a moron, probably not. Because he is doesn't want to be seen as dumb.
Yeah, well,
or a moron. In fact, that's what the word moron means is that they're dumb.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, what about wise morons? How about the Buddha was a wise moron?
I don't know about that. Can't have been that moronic.
Well, he tended to be quite wise, didn't he?
He seems to have done, yeah.
Yes, okay. So the word moron then is an emotional word that somebody else added to the equation. That's from the outside. That's an accusation rather than a state of mind.
Okay.
And whoever made up that poem, that's the state of mind that they were in. Which would sound, excuse me, sounds mostly like he was confused. He was a moron. Perhaps I am a moron. Well, of course you're a moron. You call other people who are sitting around being happy morons. Of course you're a moron because you're sitting around and you're not happy.
That's a nice take on it, but really the guy just wrote it for a laugh, I think.
Yeah.
As
because it is funny that he's a moron because he's calling other people a moron. And he doesn't even know that that's the situation. So of course it's a joke. But that's the whole point is that it comes from ignorance. That's the funny part about that joke is that it's an ignorant joke. It's coming out of ignorance. Calling people morons, to where in fact you don't know that they're a moron. They might be so wise that they don't bother to get up doing the kinds of stuff that bothers you.
Oh, yeah. That also is possible.
So when you're sitting there, just sit there wisely saying, ha ha, I don't have any moronic things to go do.
Yes. Right. So that hasn't really answered why do I feel like I shouldn't like I can't be bothered. Can't be bothered to practice.
Why don't we cultivate that? Why do I bother? That's in fact something that needs to be investigated. What is bothered? Why do you get bothered? Why can't you do stuff without getting bothered doing it? And if anything bothers you, then don't do anything and stay unbothered.
Yeah, well, that's you got a good prescription. Well, I'm not sure prescription there. I mean, that's you
won't give me any credit for anything.
well, this is disputation and argument. This is the basic. This is what I believe the Jews do all the time. Over the.
Yeah, well, here's the point: is can you come out of your argument with me and go down and sit down and be happy and not be bothered by anything? Can
Sure,
you
I
actually
can,
put
because I
it
was
into
just doing it
practice?
before I spoke to you.
Yeah. Okay. So then we're just having fun in our argument because we're actually doing the practice correctly. And so I congratulate you for that, Gerry. I really enjoyed talking with you.
Thank
But
you.
I don't argue much with you. I kind of explain and put back into a perspective the kind of language that you use.
Indeed.
Okay,
Which brings
like
me.
insight. I mean, you were talking about insight. You don't even know insight into what. And the answer to that is insight into what bothers us.
Right. Well, I thought it was all to do with insight into impermanence and that sort of thing.
Isn't that the whole point then? But you see, insight into permanence sounds very scientific. And I say insight into what bothers you, that's much more down in the gut, down into the feeling, the emotional side. Because bother is an emotional word. I mean, bother is not a scientific word. Bother can't be measured with a compass and a measuring stick, a T-square. When I say compass, by the way, I'm talking about not one of those things with a little magnet on it, but
I know the
triangle,
thing
right?
with the 2 points, that you
Right.
Yeah.
And you can't measure bothered scientifically, but you can certainly measure it emotionally.
Well, the psychologists try to, I suppose, but then they call themselves scientists. I don't know. Anyway,
well, that's a major problem with humans is that they can't tell the difference between what's science and what's art. Like the word bother. Why bother? The answer to that is, well, if I do it, is it a bother? Can I do it and it not be a bother? Liking and not liking again. That's what we're talking about. Exactly. Is that in fact the word bother means dukkha, or can I do it without dukkha? Can I do it without being bothered with it? I like the word bother. It doesn't bother me at all.
Yeah. Which actually mention of having been doing it before I spoke to you brings me to question. I'm sitting there fairly well established in breathing and appreciating, I think, sukha. I'm not thinking of anything very much. I'm just feeling happy. And I start to smell things. Now, there are workmen working in the flat below mine. The house was originally one house. It's been divided, and the basement was made into a separate flat. Now somebody's
let's cut through the story into where you are sitting.
Here am I sitting.
Now you can smell something that you wouldn't have ordinarily smelled. Well, that's exactly what we're looking for.
That's not the case.
Let's get into our senses.
That is not the case. Smell. Sorry, that is not the case. This is not something I wouldn't normally smell, because smells come up because the original conversion of the house was badly done, and smells do come up from the basement. So what I'm thinking is, I'm smelling something, and then the whole thing takes off from there. Am I smelling smoke or am I smelling chemical? What am I smelling? Is this going to be a danger or is this not? Am I, is there possibly something burning somewhere? And so on.
Maybe it's a dead body.
Eh?
Maybe it's a dead body.
Nah, wrong smell.
Doesn't smell that way. Okay. Well, here's the thing, though, going back to what I was mentioning, is do you like the smell of what you smell? Probably not. It's a smell that you don't like.
It's a smell that could be dangerous.
Right. That's the
fire,
thought. It
could
be dangerous. But the thought it could be dangerous comes from the perspective of I don't like it, or
Of
it's
course.
unfamiliar,
Of
as
course.
opposed to, oh, I know that smell. That's Aunt Susie rotting.
Yeah, but
But
I
you
mean,
see, when we don't know, that's when the fear comes up, and that's when the maybe something's wrong or something's bad. And guess what? While you're sitting in meditation, you don't need to be thinking about that. You can say, oh, I'll check that smell later.
well,
There, in fact, to the way that you described it, you've already got workmen working in the basement. So let them deal with the smell. And I can sit here happily and not bother with the smell.
well, what I was going to ask you is, I am sitting there being happy, possibly, well, certainly fat and possibly dumb, and this smell comes up, and I start to think, part of my mind goes off to think about the smell, part of it maintains on the sort of happy emotion. Am I getting a one by one as they arose here? Is that what
Yeah,
one by one as they arose is talking about?
yeah, you feel good, and then you smell, and then you feel good again, and then you smell, and then you start thinking, oh, this smell may be dangerous, and there's one thing after another. The question is, can you say, never mind about that smell, I'm going to just sit here and be happy?
Well, eventually I did, otherwise I would have got up and started looking out of the window, but I find that looking out of the window wouldn't help anything, because if it's anything, it's downstairs, and I'd have to open the door and try and go downstairs and see what they're doing downstairs,
And who
and I'm
can
not going to do
bother?
that.
Right, why bother?
Well, I
Exactly.
didn't bother. Yeah.
So, anyway,
Okay.
I'm going to have to go.
So am
And
I.
so let's go ahead and finish this conversation now.
Okay.
It's been delightful.
Thank you very much. Yes, for that it has. It has. Good. Okay.
All right.
Cheers.
Well, we'll see you later.
Cheers and bye-bye.